So when a judge declares that a sexual relationship between a man and a woman can be considered akin to marriage, especially its legal rights when it comes to maintenance for the woman, because that was the context in which this judgment was delivered, is this judgment to be seen as progressive, or are parts of it actually archaic in equating sex to marriage? After all, there are many men and women who have sexual relationships but are not married. Could that woman then go to court in such a relationship and demand maintenance of her lover or partner? All kinds of very complicated questions raised by this verdict tonight. Let's introduce our panel this evening. We're joined from Kolkata tonight. Very privileged to have. We have Justice A.K. Ganguly. He's, of course, a former judge of the Supreme Court and presently heads the Human Rights Commission in West Bengal. We're also joined tonight by Jaya Jaitley. He's the former president of the Samta Party. Also joining us from Mumbai tonight is Chitra Krishnamurthy, actor and writer. Joining us from Mumbai tonight is well-known matrimonial lawyer Mrinalini Deshmukh. With me in the studio is Mrinal Satish, an associate professor with the National Law University. And also joining me from Mumbai is well-known columnist Anil Dharkar. Justice Ganguly, if I may start with you tonight, you have actually, as a Supreme Court judge, along with Justice Singhvi, you actually suggested that given the increase in live-in relationships, given the fact that many men and women today are opting to cohabit instead of getting married, it was time for the Supreme Court to create a wider bench that would look at some of these questions. Could such a relationship be regarded in the same way as a marriage? Should a woman who is in such a relationship have the right to maintenance, and so on? But the Madras High Court verdict raises another very complicated question. It basically seeks to say that if a man and a woman consummate their relationship sexually, then that relationship becomes like a marriage. Now, doesn't this create all kinds of very, very complicated precedents and open itself up to misuse?
No, the question is that the judgment which has been delivered by the Madras High Court, it must be resting on some principles. The principles which we have tried to formulate in the Supreme Court judgment is that if two human beings, men or women, live as husband and wife for a considerably long time, then there is a presumption that they are living as married couple. This presumption is nothing new which we have done. This is something which has been held valid by the House of Lords. Then in our country it was held by the Indian Appeal Courts, then the Supreme Court. We have said that the principle of maintenance which is there, the principle of maintenance is given from the very early days in order to prevent vagrancy. It has a social purpose. So it is not required to prove that the woman claiming maintenance has the status of a legally wedded wife.
Yes.
Otherwise this will create serious difficulties in society. In rural areas, because of the condition of the women, they are helpless, lack of empowerment, they are lured into marital relationship. Now, if the man has no obligation, he will walk out after living with the woman for 2 years, walk out of it, and will completely deny any maintenance to that deprived woman. This is completely against the true spirit of that provision, and also against the constitutional norms of individual dignity. Therefore, we have said that these questions have to be decided by a larger bench, because unfortunately two benches
Yes.
have taken a rather constricted view of the expression wife in section 125 of the Criminal Procedure Code.
But Justice Ganguly, if I may interrupt you, sir, to ask you that while in your judgment and another Supreme Court judgment, both courts talk about such a relationship where a man and a woman cohabit for a reasonable or a significant amount of time, the Madras High Court judgment doesn't actually specify a duration of cohabitation. So my question really is that if somebody were to have a short-lived sexual encounter or for a few months only, and then petition the court and say this man must give me maintenance, would that not be a misuse of what should be alimony or palimony laws?
No, there you may be right. The question is just an acquaintance and some sex.
Yes.
Without the family reunion. They must live as members of the family. What we are trying to say that once they live as members of the family, as husband and wife in their locality, merely because of the fact that they don't have the rituals of a valid marriage, Because Supreme Court said every marriage has to be registered. Suppose the marriage is not registered, that does not deprive the woman from having the benefits of maintenance. Mere relationship of sexual relationship for say for a week or for 5 days or 10 days is not valid. In Canadian law, the test which is there, if there is a child in the wedlock, child in the relationship, then it's valid. Then it is entitled to get maintenance. But if there is no child, and if it cannot be proved that the relationship existed anything beyond say 2 months, 3 months, then it may not entitle the woman for maintenance.
Well, the confusing thing...
It's not a charter for licentious living.
Yes, sir, but the confusing thing about this particular judgment, Justice Ganguly, the confusing thing about this particular judgment is that it actually does not specify that, and it further goes on to say, let me take this to Jaya Jetli, and if we can bring up excerpts of this very interesting judgment, it actually goes on to say that if a man wants to leave a woman with whom he has a sexual relationship, then he would have to get a decree of divorce before he moves on to a new, to his next relationship. Now, I'm just wondering what kind of litigation this is going to unleash in court. Jaya Jetli, let me bring you in one, talking a little bit about your personal experience. You are somebody who has been married, you were divorced amicably, and you actually took a position, I remember, saying that you did not want to negotiate for alimony and money, and you did not want to demean a relationship because of that. On the other hand, you actually had to go to court to seek visitation rights to George Fernandez, whose family did not allow you to meet him. So you've actually really seen this from both sides. When you look at this judgment today, part of it could be construed to be progressive, because after all, the court is saying the rituals of marriage are not necessary for a relationship to have that sanctity. But on the other hand, it seems to equate sex with marriage. It doesn't seem to recognize that sex does take place outside of marriage without all the accompanying trappings.
I think this judgment has been very convoluted and caused more confusions than it's trying to resolve. The problem is that a marriage is something that is a contract, whether we like it or not. And as I've said earlier, there should be now prenups coming in, because if there is something to be paid out at the end of a marriage, then something about this should be sorted out before the marriage. There's another issue also, that if a woman, just by living with a man for some time or even after marriage, expects him to pay alimony, supposing there are no children, because this judgment doesn't mention anything about children, then I don't see why the woman, instead of trying to gather money and efforts to get money from this man who doesn't love her anymore, what happens to her parents? They are the ones who have told her to get married anyway, probably asked her to stay in the relationship. But if marriage is untenable, it's time, I think, now women turn back to their parents and say, well, why did you leave us in mid-ocean and in the lurch?
Jaya Jetli, let me just correct you though. Let me just correct you a little bit.
We don't have to ask a man.
May I just correct you on one fact? The judgment actually came into being after a woman petitioned the Madras High Court because she had 2 children from her partner who subsequently left her. The woman then goes to court and says that I was married to this man. The man says that I was never legally wedded to this woman.
It's a valid case for maintenance.
Yes.
It's a valid case for her maintenance.
Yes. So so actually,
yes, well,
Jaya, it's not silent on children.
children.
It's not silent on the issue of children. It is
well,
actually talking about a woman.
Because after all, the man has to take equal responsibility for the children.
Yes.
But I would still say that marriage or non-marriage doesn't only revolve around either sexual consummation or money.
Yeah.
There is far more to it than that. And I don't think multiple sexual relationships, maybe for 2-3 years at a time. I mean, there are it's so funny that film stars in the USA, they get married 8 times, shed their husbands 8 times, go through divorces 8 times, when nobody in society is really asking them to be married at all. When society is already accepting the fact that people can live together, and many people live together for many, many years without getting married, I think it's only when contentious issues arise that these have to be looked at. But why sex has to come into the picture? Obviously, sex has come into the picture if children are born.
Yeah.
But I don't think that judges should go into the issue of consummation being considered a marriage, because that is completely incorrect and would not be acceptable to anyone, even the partners in that marriage or society or
so
the way society is
basically you're
moving
saying
now
that the
towards
court is actually
progressive.
getting far too involved and occupying far too large a presence in the bedroom. Suchitra Krishnamurthy, you've been married, you've been divorced. This is a whole different argument. This is saying at one hand, and quite interestingly, that even if children take place in the context of a sexual relationship, those children should not be called illegitimate, which I find a kind of progressive view of the court to take.
Progressive. Yeah.
But then at the same time, the same court and the same judge is actually arguing that you need a decree of divorce before you leave one partner to the other. Now, is this not going to open a floodgate of litigation that could really be grievously misused?
I think so, and Barka, what I'm actually questioning is whether this actually has been misunderstood and misrepresented by a section of the media. Could a judge who earns, his position with after a lot of education and wisdom and everything have actually passed a judgment that is so on the one hand, it is supporting that woman who was living, it's case specific. So in this case, it is supporting the woman, providing alimony and maintenance for the children and everything. But on the other hand, if you're, giving people, if you're giving adults the choice to have sex, they should have the choice to, decide whether they want to be married or not. And it's, in a way, I find it blasphemous, to just put marriage and commitment in the same, not just marriage, but any kind of commitment and sex, to put it all in the same, on the same page, and say that, sex equals, sex is the same thing. Sex is a body function, and I think even earlier, if you noticed, Tamil Nadu, when Khushbu said these things about premarital sex and people should use condoms and everything, the people reacted in a very puritanical way, and there's this kind of denial that sex even exists or can exist outside of marriage, which is something that really needs to be looked at, because it's very dangerous ground they're treading.